Court records obtained by 13 Investigates allege a culture of silence about child sex abuse within Woodland Park's Jehovah's Witnesses congregation. Tonight, a 60-year-old Florissant man is at the center of those allegations, in jail, charged with 8 counts of child abuse. Investigative reporter Dan Beatty combed through court records today. He's live with us to explain what they reveal. Dan?
Tonight, Sean Swisher is in the Teller County Jail, accused of sexually abusing multiple children, but for decades, he was an elder at the Jehovah's Witnesses Kingdom Hall in Woodland Park. These records right here show that people inside the congregation were afraid they'd be kicked out if they came forward with child sex abuse allegations against Swisher. When interviewed by Teller County investigators, witnesses said Sean Swisher was a, quote, trusted elder and highly respected in the congregation, but the Jehovah's Witnesses elder was also out of control. Teller County investigators list 8 separate victims of child abuse in Swisher's arrest report. More than a dozen people interviewed with detectives about Swisher's behavior when he was an elder inside the Jehovah's Witnesses Kingdom Hall in Woodland Park. Among the allegations, Swisher would inappropriately touch or tickle children on their breasts, inner thighs, even grab their private parts. One victim alleges Swisher told them their parents were okay with him doing this and not to tell anyone after putting his hands down their pants. Multiple victims recall being molested, saying Swisher would, quote, tie up, torture, and sexually abuse in any way possible. Witnesses and victims told detectives that they were discouraged from going to authorities, and sex abuse allegations were always handled internally. One victim alleges an elder told them the punishment that God gave was worse than the punishment that men gave you. Several other elders and people associated with Swisher are named in the arrest report, accused of molesting and abusing children. Their names are redacted. The Teller County Sheriff's Office says there could be additional arrests stemming from this ongoing investigation. 13 Investigates reached out to the Jehovah's Witnesses headquarters in New York with questions about Swisher and their policies when it comes to reporting abuse. We're waiting on a response. Reporting in the studio, Dan Beatty, 13 Investigates.
All right, Dan, thanks.
Yes, I actually represented Amelia, the woman that you saw in Jason's piece. She brought the first successful claim against the Jehovah's Witnesses for child sexual abuse in the UK, and that was back in 2015. And although 10 might seem like maybe a small number of cases, that reflects the difficulty that victims have in coming forward, particularly those in the Jehovah's Witness organization, because of the 2-witness rule and various other factors.
So how were you able to find 9 others, or how did they find you?
They do have quite a network of a good support network amongst ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. And in fact, off the back of reporting on the judgment in Amelia's case, the other victim that you heard from, Emily, who was actually abused previously by the same person, got in touch. And so it has really been through media and reporting that people have gotten in touch. I think it's important to point out that those people who have gotten in touch have left the organization. And honestly, mostly there's a lot more victims, I believe, within the organization who have not come forward for a variety of reasons. One of them being that the religion practices shunning. So if you decide to leave the organization, then you will be shunned by everybody that you know, including your immediate family members. So that's obviously additionally a big barrier to victims coming forward, which I don't think was particularly well highlighted by the inquiry's report.
So when you were going through what happened to these victims, were you surprised by what you were hearing?
I would say I was horrified. Particularly, all child sexual abuse is horrific, and you would be horrified by any of it. But I think particularly in the Jehovah's Witness cases, what's so horrifying is that time and time again, I've seen a situation where they are aware of the fact that there is an abuser in their congregation and nothing is done about it. And that means that that abuser goes on to assault many, many more victims. And it's really tragic and horrifying to see a situation where you know a child could have been saved. And because they took no steps to safeguard children, there are more and more victims whose lives are changed and ruined forever.
Let's talk about this report now. You did mention it. reading that is horrific, but one would assume that what you've already dealt with these victims, you wouldn't be totally shocked by what you were reading in this report.
No, I'm not shocked at all. I'm really pleased that the inquiry did decide to look at abuse in religious organizations and settings, and particularly include the Jehovah's Witnesses in that, which was something that I was pushing for a long time. I think that this is a huge area that the report highlights, that there is really no oversight of religious organizations in terms of child safeguarding. There's things that they should do and are meant to be doing, but they're not required by law to be doing. And this is an area that we really need to look at very carefully in order to safeguard children and vulnerable people.
Okay. They made some recommendations too, really, that organizations should have a child protection policy and supporting procedures. One is just amazed that in 2021 they don't, and that the government should legislate to amend the definition of full-time education to bring any setting that is a pupil's primary place of education within the scope of a registered school. Briefly, what do you make of those two recommendations?
I think they're helpful, but I think the thing to remember in the context of Jehovah's Witnesses, which you'll see throughout the evidence that they presented to the inquiry and in the inquiry's report as well, is that they insist that they don't separate children from their parents, and therefore there's no need for them to adhere to any of these policies and procedures. The truth of the matter is, in practice, that's not true. Children are often separated from their parents, and there needs to be other ways to bring this organization in line with current child safeguarding policies.
You're about to meet a young woman raised as a Jehovah's Witness who says she was molested by a fellow church member and that the church had been protecting pedophiles within their midst. Now alleged victims from across the country are coming out with claims of their own. With the religion under siege tonight, here's Nightline co-anchor Dan Harris.
I can remember feeling like, you know, the inside of me screaming out to the people of the congregation for help.
This is the story of Candace Conti, a young woman stepping out of the shadows to take on the all-male leadership of a wealthy, secretive religion.
On behalf of the North Fremont Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses,
who she says failed to protect her from a predatory pedophile.
Just kind of screaming out for somebody to come protect me.
What most of us know about the Jehovah's Witnesses is that they may have knocked on our door as part of their global proselytizing campaign, celebrated in church videos like these.
Bringing solace to millions in a troubled world.
But now Candace Conti is out to prove that there is a dark side, that church leaders, ensconced in their New York City headquarters known as the Watchtower, have fostered a policy of silence on child abusers.
do not reveal the confidential talk of another.
Some of whom have gone on to repeatedly reoffend. Do you remember your first impression of Jonathan Kendrick?
He's just a big person. Found him very scary.
When Candace was 9 years old, she says she was abused by a well-liked member of her small congregation in Fremont, California. While door-to-door evangelizing, which Candace would often do without her parents, she says Jonathan Kendrick began taking her to his house and molesting her.
I don't really want to go into everything else because I don't want to have nightmares.
Right. Understood. She testified that he abused her several times a month for what she says felt like 2 years. When you were a kid, why did you feel like you couldn't come forward?
Bringing that up just would demolish the only people that I knew. I think I was scared too.
Candace had nowhere else to turn. She says because of her beliefs, she grew up isolated. Do you remember what the church taught you about the world?
Everybody outside of the Jehovah's Witnesses are pretty much walking dead.
Like all Jehovah's Witnesses, she was taught that Armageddon is coming soon.
There will be a new earth, a paradise earth.
And that the only survivors will be true believers who will live in a heaven on earth. Growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, Candace didn't celebrate birthdays or Christmas, and she didn't make friends outside of the church.
Anybody outside of the Jehovah's Witnesses could be used as a tool by Satan to pull you away from your Christian family.
So it was only years later, after she'd grown up and left the church, when she found Jonathan Kendrick on the sex offender registry for abusing another child in a different congregation, and she finally decided to act.
I felt really guilty for not for not doing anything so that this wouldn't have happened to somebody else.
She went to local church leaders and told her story.
But they wouldn't listen to me unless I proved my case.
How do you prove that you've been abused?
You have 2 witnesses to the crime.
According to the religion's internal system of justice, it's believed that the Bible requires there to be at least 2 witnesses in order for a crime to be punishable. Who abuses children with 2 witnesses?
Nobody does. And that was precisely the point.
The law is.
So she went to the police instead. But with Kendrick denying the abuse, the police never brought charges, although they continue to investigate. Her next move was to sue the Watchtower itself.
They need more than one lesson.
She hired a lawyer, Rick Simmons, who had spent many years representing the victims of pedophile priests in the Catholic Church.
If ever there was a group that needs the sun to shine on them, it's this one. Because when your doorbell rings on Saturday morning and your kid answers the door, you don't want that guy to be a child molester.
All right, sir, if you'll please raise your right hand.
When Candace and her attorney began conducting depositions with local church leaders, known as elders, they learned something astonishing.
Do you recall becoming aware at any time of sexual abuse of a child by Jonathan Kendrick?
Yes.
Even before Candace was abused, the elders knew that Jonathan Kendrick, who then held a leadership position in the congregation, had molested his own stepdaughter, his first known victim.
He confessed to touching her one evening when he came home.
And yet the elders did not call the police and did not warn the rest of the congregation. Did that make you furious?
Yeah, I was disgusted. I was absolutely disgusted. It was more damage control at that point than saving somebody.
What was the reason that the congregation was not notified?
We don't make that public to the congregation. That's confidential.
A confidentiality policy set by the church leaders back in New York. In a series of letters to elders across the country on the issue of child abuse, the Watchtower made its policy clear. Though they acknowledge that some states have child abuse reporting laws, they said allegations should otherwise be kept secret to all but church leaders because worldly people are quick to resort to lawsuits if they feel their rights have been violated.
We kept an eye on his actions while he was in the congregation.
They also removed Kendrick from his leadership position per Watchtower policy on the grounds of uncleanness.
The members of the North Fremont Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child abuse of any form.
In court, attorneys for the church argued that it's not the responsibility of a religious organization to protect children from sexual abuse by other congregation members.
The Jehovah's Witnesses are not a youth group.
They said the church provides education to parents on the risk of sexual abuse, but they argued that Candace's alleged abuse never took place on church property. And they also questioned whether she was specifically assigned by the elders to go door-to-door preaching, known as field service, with Kendrick.
The elders did their job spiritually, and I think that's all we can ask of these men. Thank you.
The Watchtower denied our request for an interview, but sent us a statement peppered with Bible citations that said victims of child abuse have the right to report to governmental authorities and that the church won't stand in their way, adding that they do not shield abusers from authorities or the consequences of their actions. The jurors sided with Candace.
One step closer, oh my gosh.
In a landmark verdict in 2012, she was eventually awarded more than $15 million. The Watchtower is appealing the case.
I felt wrong and I felt dirty.
Candace Conti's victory has opened the floodgates.
I just want him to be behind bars where he belongs.
Apparently inspiring around 24 other alleged victims from across the country to file lawsuits accusing church leadership of covering up charges of abuse.
Absolute silence to protect itself from scandal.
But as these alleged victims muster the courage to tell their stories, their alleged abusers, like Jonathan Kendrick, are steering clear of the spotlight.
Okay, this is his street. We're pulling up to his house.
He was absent from the trial, and he denied our repeated requests for an interview. So we went to see him.
Mr. Kendrick, my name is Dan Harris. I'm from ABC News. Can we talk to you about Candace Conti?
My statement is this. I've never been alone with Candace Conti. I never molested Candace Conti.
Do you really think she's just making this up?
What do you mean, think? I just told you.
You never did any field service with her alone?
Never. I've never... Okay, get this right. I've never been alone with Candace Conti. Ever. Never have I been alone with Candace Conti.
Kendrick strongly denies it.
I'm sure that's the smart thing for him to say. But do you expect honesty from a child molester? Really?
When you told church officials about what happened with your stepdaughter, do you think they should have told the rest of the congregation?
That's not... Hey, you know what? It wasn't my call.
I'm calling the police.
Did they tell you to keep it secret?
No, of course not.
Could you please send the police to...
This woman is Kendrick's current wife.
Well, there's newspaper people here trying to get a story.
You may remember that Candace only decided to step forward after learning that Kendrick had abused another child, a crime that landed him in jail for 7 months. That child, Kendrick's third alleged victim, was his wife's 7-year-old granddaughter.
Can we ask you about the case with your granddaughter?
No, you can't.
Why not?
Because it's none of your business. He paid for that crime. ABC News.
Candace is now trying to move on with her life. She graduated from college and recently got engaged. But she says she will continue fighting on behalf of all of the victims of child abuse.
And it's not just me. I don't hold a monopoly on pain. And if we can change that momentum, instead of being victims, we can have our words speak for change, then this pain might be a little bit worth it.
Since Candace's verdict, the church appears to have made some adjustments to its confidentiality policy when it comes to child abuse. But critics, including Candace, say it's not enough. And Jonathan Kendrick? He says he's still a member in good standing of the Jehovah's Witnesses.
You know what?
For Nightline, this is Dan Harris in San Francisco.
An investigation into child sexual abuse among Jehovah's Witnesses and accusations that religious leaders led a cover-up within some of the group's 14,000 U.S. congregations. Our colleagues from the Center for Investigative Reporting obtained confidential memos shedding new light on the revelations. Special correspondent Trey Bundy has the story from Reveal, a new website, radio show, and podcast run by the center.
At a convention of Jehovah's Witnesses in California, new members are taking the plunge.
At your baptism, you said yes.
They're joining more than 8 million members worldwide. Believers are taught to renounce secular society because it's controlled by Satan, and not to socialize too much with outsiders. But charges of sexual abuse have brought this insular community under greater scrutiny. And now, in this San Francisco courtroom, the first child abuse case against the Jehovah's Witnesses to go to trial is underway.
The next matter on the calendar.
Candace Conti is suing the organization for failing to protect her from a known child abuser when she was 9 years old.
If I were to sum up our goals of this case, it was to attack the policies and procedures that were in place that let a serial molester continue to molest children.
Conti's lawyer says instructions from Jehovah's Witness leaders have enabled child molesters.
The instructions were you keep these pedophiles secret.
The case hinges on letters from Jehovah's Witness leaders to the heads of local congregations. For almost 20 years, they've ordered them to send reports like this one for every known child abuser, to hide these cases from their congregations, and not to cooperate with law enforcement or the courts unless instructed to. They've refused judges' orders to turn over these abuse reports, so no one knows how many cases like Conti's are out there.
Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child abuse of any form.
The Jehovah's Witnesses insist that they comply with the law, and their lawyers argue that the First Amendment gives them the right to set child abuse policies as they see fit.
Religious beliefs and standards of Jehovah's Witnesses were at play in this case from start to finish.
The religious beliefs come from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society in Brooklyn, which has often used the First Amendment to defend its policies of separation. In 1943, it even won a Supreme Court case, arguing that school children should not be forced to pledge allegiance to the flag.
May it please the court, James McCabe on behalf of the North Fremont
Watchtower
Congregation of
lawyers
Jehovah's
who
Witnesses.
refuse to speak with us are again claiming a First Amendment defense to keep child abuse in its congregation secret.
And the elders are counseled in that letter to give special heed to the counsel, do not reveal the confidential talk of another, quoting from the Bible book of Proverbs, chapter 25, verse 9.
Candace Conti was part of a Jehovah's Witness congregation in Fremont, California. She was often grouped with adults to go knocking on doors, including this man, Jonathan Kendrick.
He was very dominating, very domineering, he commanded a presence.
She says Kendrick would take advantage of their time door knocking to find ways to be alone with her.
Jonathan Kendrick molested me as a child. I really kind of pushed everything down and tried not to think about it as much as I could.
What no one in Conti's family knew was that Jonathan Kendrick had admitted to molesting another child a year earlier.
Regarding possible sexual abuse.
Michael Clark, an elder in the congregation, was asked about it in this deposition.
Do you recall becoming aware of a report of sexual abuse of a child by Jonathan Kendrick?
Yes.
When did you first become aware of such a report?
He had called us to his home to discuss or to confess to an incident with his stepdaughter.
Clark never called the police. He followed Watchtower protocol. He wrote to New York headquarters asking how to deal with Kendrick's confession. They told him not to investigate the matter further. Instead, they said, provide him with strong scriptural counsel to avoid a repetition of such a serious offense.
We don't make that public to the congregation. That's confidential.
The elders did not warn other members that one of their own was a child abuser.
And that's the policy and the practice of Jehovah's Witnesses that you learned as an elder, correct?
Yes.
Clark says the elders told Kendrick not to be alone with children, but he was still allowed to join in congregation activities that included minors. A year later, one of those minors was Candace Conti.
And I don't think it ever left. I know it never left me. You know, it's always there. And it was just probably one of those days that, I just felt it.
Conti kept quiet about the abuse until years later when she discovered on a sex offender registry that he had gone on to molest another young girl. She decided to sue the Watchtower.
I think after I had found that out, I had this sense of guilt. What if I did something? What if I hadn't been such a coward? What if I had done something to maybe protect this other child? I knew he was capable of, but I didn't do anything. And then now look what happened.
I drove to Oakley, California, where Kendrick had moved when he left Conti's congregation. I met the girl Conti had found. She agreed to talk to us if we didn't show her face.
When I was a little girl, probably about 6 or 7, Jonathan Kendrick had abused me.
She blames the Watchtower's secrecy for enabling Kendrick to marry into her family and target her. The family sued the Jehovah's Witnesses.
They knew that he had a past, and they kept it from us.
When Kendrick moved to the Oakley congregation, no one was told he was a child molester. Not even Roger Bentley, who served as an elder there for 30 years. He reviewed this letter of introduction from Kendrick's old congregation.
There's no indication at all that he's guilty of child abuse.
So no mention of child abuse, but any mention of children?
Well, if you read it, it very specifically says he's a very interesting individual who has taken the lead with some young ones in the congregation and helped them from veering off course. That's not a child abuser. That's a recommendation. That's a very specific recommendation. Oh, relax, he's good with kids.
I've spent months trying to interview Watchtower leaders, but they wouldn't talk to me. Instead, they sent a statement saying they comply with reporting laws, they do not shield abusers from law enforcement, and are committed to preventing child abuse. And in one of the dozen lawsuits I've been following, Watchtower supervisor Richard Ash was asked if the organization has a responsibility to protect children from abuse.
But within the congregation, ours is a spiritual protection. When we're talking about physical protection, that's up to the secular authorities to provide. And so
He was asked about the Watchtower's Bible-based directives to keep child abuse cases confidential.
It states in paragraph 3, there is a time to keep quiet when your words should prove to be few. Do you see that?
Yes,
sir. You know, Mr.
I
Joe.
object to that. It's a violation of the First Amendment, freedom of religion, freedom of association.
The courts continue to grapple with the question, should freedom of religion outweigh the responsibility to protect children? In Candace Conti's case, the jury overrode the First Amendment claims and decided the Watchtower and the North Fremont congregation were negligent and did not adequately protect her from abuse. Kendrick maintains he never molested her. Pending appeal, she was awarded more than $15 million in compensation and damages. It's the first time a jury has ordered the Watchtower to pay for its child abuse policies. But for Kendrick's other victim, her case against the Watchtower was thrown out. Even though Kendrick confessed to the abuse in this deposition and served about 8 months in jail, the judge affirmed that the Watchtower's policies were protected by the First Amendment. It was not liable because the abuse occurred at home and not in the course of religious activity. The Watchtower had no obligation to warn the family about Kendrick's past. Kendrick is now free and still an active member of the Oakley congregation.
The fact that Jonathan Kendrick is still a member of Good Standings is absolutely ridiculous. It's scary. I mean, the fact that he still has access to children, and really, my parents didn't have the power to know that Jonathan Kendrick was a child abuser. Let's give the parents the power to be able to protect their children. And that's what these organizations are hiding.
Despite the huge verdict against the Watchtower, the organization is sticking to its policies. In fact, it just released another confidential memo reminding elders to keep quiet about child abuse. I'm Trey Bundy from Reveal for the NewsHour.
Good morning, everyone. We are here today to announce the 49th Investigating Grand Jury has voted on and approved presentments for charges related to 4 individuals for committing sexual abuse throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Before I go forward, I'd like to introduce the public servants who stand with me here today. Executive Deputy Attorney General Jennifer Selber, Chief Deputy Attorney General Kirsten Hine, Chief Deputy Attorney General Ron Eisenberg, who's not with us but did important work on this case, Assistant Chief Deputy Attorney General Dan Dye, our lead prosecutor on this case, and Supervisory Special Agent Doug Hilliard. I also want to make mention and give thanks to the members of the grand jury. We appreciate their service. These are independent citizen grand jurors who participated in this process, reviewed and came to their own determination about evidence, and returned these charges that I'm here to announce today. As many of you know, our office takes the abuse of children very seriously. We have arrested over 500 offenders for taking advantage of and exploiting children all throughout this Commonwealth, and that work continues here today. The cases that we are here to announce are deeply disturbing, the allegations hard to imagine, while all sharing one common tie. The 19 victims and 4 men who are being charged with sexually violating them are all members of the Jehovah's Witness organization. Most of these defendants used their faith and church to gain access to their victims, to build their trust, and then molested them. Children who have a right to grow up in a safe community, but were defiled by members of their own congregations. Some defendants only looked as far as their own families to commit their abuse. My office will not stop until these defendants are held accountable for the crimes against innocent children and until justice is achieved for these courageous survivors. This investigation began with a resource referral from a local district attorney's office back in 2019. Based on that referral, our office undertook the investigation of allegations of sexual assault involving members of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Throughout that, we learned of several incidents of sexual assault committed by different members of the Jehovah's Witness religious organizations. And as a result of our 3-year investigation, hundreds of hours of grand jury testimony, and dozens of witnesses, we filed charges against 4 individuals. I can report that early this morning, 3 of those men were taken into custody. 1 was arrested in Pennsylvania, 1 in the state of Georgia, and 1 in New York State. I want to thank the honorable men and women of the New Windsor Police, Butler Township Police, and the Coffee County Sheriff's Office in Georgia for their assistance in today's apprehensions. I will now go through each case individually, but encourage you to read the presentments, which will provide a greater level of detail of the crimes and the criminal counts that we are here charging today. First, Jose Serrano, 69, of Lancaster County. During the investigation, it was determined that Jose Serrano used his influence and common faith to sexually molest at least 6 minors, including his own daughter. He confessed to committing many of these criminal offenses to members of his community and to the grand jury. 2 of Serrano's victims testified in front of our grand jury, providing detail about the abuse that they suffered at his hands, which included groping that escalated into forcible rape. Serrano's own daughter testified to the grand jury that her mother would remind her to lock the door at night if her father was around. Serrano was charged with aggravated indecent assault, and endangering the welfare of children. Jesse Hill, 52 years old, formerly of Berks County, Pennsylvania, and now a resident of the state of Georgia. The grand jury heard testimony that Hill used his milling business to lure young boys in his Jehovah's Witness congregation with promises of alcohol, marijuana, and pornography. He lured them to his property for parties in the 1990s. He built a rapport with these victims, taking them to movie theaters and area malls and providing them with gifts. As time went on, Hill would expose himself to the children. He would grope them. He would force them to perform oral sex. Our investigation identified at least 10 victims of Mr. Hill's sexual crimes. Hill made statements admitting to many of these crimes. Jesse Hill is charged with rape, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, and corruption of minors. Robert Ostrander, 56 years old, formerly of Cambria County, now a resident of New York State. Ostrander's abuse began in 2006 and was at first physical. This abuse was directed at his family. The grand jurors heard testimony from his stepdaughter, who said that by 15, the abuse became sexual, groping, and then wrestling, and then eventually sexual assault. Ostrander and his family, including his stepdaughter, were active members of Jehovah's Witness congregation. As a result of that membership and the relationship that he and his family enjoyed, his stepdaughter became friends with another girl Ostrander was given unsupervised access to. He exploited that access and sexually assaulted her as well. Ostrander is charged with indecent assault, endangering the welfare of children, and corruption of minors. All of the charges against these 3 defendants have been filed in the corresponding counties of Lancaster, Berks, and Cambria, and will be prosecuted by my office, led by Dan Dye. And finally, Eric Elam, 61 years old, of Butler County. The grand jurors heard testimony from Elam's daughter about the sexual abuse she suffered, including being forced to perform oral sex. She told the grand jury about her father's practice of using sexual molestation as discipline in the house where she was growing up. She reported this abuse to her mother and to other members of her community. Through the documents obtained during our investigation, we obtained a summary of a meeting where Elam told others that the accounts of sexual assault must be true if she said them because, quote, his daughter does not lie. Elam was charged by my office with rape, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, aggravated indecent assault, and endangering the welfare of a child. Early this morning, when agents from our office and local police in Butler County attempted to take him into custody, he retreated into his bathroom and killed himself behind closed doors. No law enforcement officers were harmed in the process. This is tough work, and I commend the incredible prosecutors and agents here in my office who do this work day in and day out. And again, thank the members of the grand jury for their important and meaningful work. These are the types of cases that haunt us. They leave an indelible mark on our souls. And as prosecutors, as people of faith, as parents, we can't escape the impact that these cases have. These 19 children, they deserved a place to grow up in peace, not to be preyed upon. This is an abuse of trust, an abuse of power. And I'll remind you that no matter what power you cloak yourself in, everyone is accountable under the law. And if you abuse a child, I want you to know that the Office of the Attorney General here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania will find you, and we will hold you accountable. As we do more and more of these horrific cases, our agents and prosecutors continue to get better at uncovering these crimes. While some of the crimes that these men committed can't be charged due to the statute of limitations, we won't fail to hold them accountable for the crimes that we are charging them with here today. These 4 presentments lay out the nature of our investigation, but I want you to know this investigation is very active and ongoing. I will not comment on these cases or any other matters related to this investigation beyond that at this time, but I will repeat our call to anyone who has suffered abuse. We want you to know that we are here and we are listening. We are urging anyone who has had a similar experience to come forward to tell us your story. We're here to listen and we will act. Your case won't be swept under the rug. Your experience will not go unheard. This investigation is intensive and laborious, and as I said a moment ago, ongoing. We have found victims, we have heard their voices, and we have corroborated their complaints, and our work continues. Today we have the opportunity to reach out and to publicly ask if anyone has information regarding similar allegations of sexual assault. Please contact our office immediately. We have established a special hotline just for you. That number is 1-888-538-8541. Again, that special hotline we've established just for you is 888-538-8541. And with that, I'll do my best to answer your questions with the understanding, of course, that I'm constrained in what I can speak of due to the nature that this investigation is active and ongoing.
Right now, are there other suspects that you're still investigating, and do you have any reason to believe that nationally this could be a bigger national case with more suspects in other states?
All I can say is that our case is active and ongoing, and I'm obviously constrained today based on what is written in these presentments. And I think as the prosecution begins, more information will be presented as we make our case, which may help address your questions. Go ahead.
I just want to be clear. You said that all 4 of the men charged were Jehovah Witness. Is that correct?
They were involved there, yes.
So do you think it's something within that religion itself? I mean, because these men were not from the same area. They were from different counties.
I really can't comment beyond what I've already said and beyond what's in the four corners of the presentment. And as I said a moment ago to your colleague, as we move forward here, as the prosecution begins, I think more information will be presented as we make our case. Okay, thank you all very much.
5 names announced today bring a total of 9 people since October last year who are facing charges in connection to that investigating grand jury. The acting attorney general today said 2 men came from Lancaster County.
We learned of several incidents of sexual assault committed by members of Jehovah Witnesses congregation.
Acting AG Michelle Henry on Tuesday announced 42-year-old Abimael Valentin Matos of Lancaster County was among those charged. In his case, the abuse was alleged to have happened more than a decade ago.
It is alleged that Matos abused a 15-year-old girl who at the time was half his age, claiming that he intended to marry her.
The acting AG also announced charges against 44-year-old Norman Aviles of Lancaster County, whom she said was an elder in his congregation and is accused of molesting at least 3 young children between the ages of 5 and 10.
He was trusted to babysit and even act as a guardian to one of his victims.
Court documents say some allegations against Aviles date back to the late 1990s. The acting AG says that Aviles remains at large while the other men named today are in custody. Prosecutors also wrote in court documents that one victim of Aviles reported abuse from another congregant, something that would be addressed in a future presentment. In our Harrisburg newsroom, Tom Lehman, WGAL News 8.